one of the reasons, this is very similar to the last time, but it was kind of one of the next ones in the unit. We're in a Let's Be Rational unit, which is all about rational numbers. Basically, it's all fractions, operations with fractions. So we just finished adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators and estimating sums and differences of fractions. And so this next step is finding parts of parts. So essentially multiplying fractions.
We're making sure, though, to be really purposeful about saying parts of parts, because we want the students, too often students are taught, here is how you multiply fractions, but they don't understand the concepts behind multiplying fractions. Mm-hmm. And so when you multiply fractions, you're finding parts of a part. And so we want to make it very clear that this is what you're doing, and then to then associate that concept with multiplication.
Right. Huger picture, we're trying to get them to be fluent and comfortable in understanding what's actually happening behind the formulas that they learn or the rules that they learn. Kind of like comfortable navigating the world and the mathematical situations smoothly. And by comfort, we mean like what's actually happening if you're sharing a pizza with someone and you each have a half a pizza, and then a friend comes and is like, I want a fourth of your half. Like, what's actually happening there?
We're also making connections to money. Like, so one of them is like, so for instance, one of the problems in this section is like you're fundraising, you're doing a bake sale, but not everyone wants a half of a batch of brownies, you know, like people want fourths, and then sometimes they'll have a fourth left, and then they'll only want, you know, this portion, and then how do you calculate, you know, how much to charge them on that? So I think like, again, to connect to the bigger picture, we're working on building that mathematical fluency within what kids need for the real world, and then also for those higher concepts that they're eventually going to go to. So yeah, just building a foundation of fluency with fractions. And this is, fractions are taught in 3rd and 4th grade, mm-hmm. not in like super detail. It's pretty like foundational, but some of our students we're finding in 6th grade are like, we know this. Yeah. And so it's been a little bit of a challenge because there's a lot of differentiation to do. And
there's some pushback with, we know this already, why are we doing it? But then putting it in the context of a larger problem, sometimes they think they know the formula, so they just apply it.
Exactly.
And then when you say, well, what's happening? Or how did that work? Prove why that mathematically works. They're like, oh, well, my mom said to do it this way. Or that's how I learned in 3rd grade.
Or it's a trick.
Right.
You can switch, you know, you can get the inverse of that. And so it's really important to us that they're understanding the concepts that they're applying. Because if they understand that, that's going to help them figure out and problem solve in the future, instead of just being like, I see the word multiply, I see that they're fractions, so I know this rule applies. Because they're not always going to know that in a problem you need to multiply, you know? So we're trying to teach them like fluency with the skills, so.
We have a share out after, we're letting them, so the exciting thing about this lesson, which we did a few times before when we started this fraction unit, was using PlayDoh. And we call it modeling dough very explicitly so that it's not for play, it's to model. And so they each get their own little individual thing of Play-Doh, and they're gonna, and have a little placemat, and it's just a sheet protector with a piece of paper in it, but they all are supposed to have a whiteboard marker so they can mold their Play-Doh into like this time it'll be a square, and they can actually label it on the placemat too. So like, this is 1/8, or like show, or remove a part and put it here and be like, circle it and be like, this is 1/4 of an 1/8. So and
then they use a ruler to cut it into straight parts based on, you know. So I mean, overall the modeling dough really boosts their engagement no matter what. And it also is great for our learners who need a little bit more hands-on and like a little extra kind of visual cues.
Yeah.
And then they take that to the lesson once they're actually solving investigation 2.1.
And it gives us a chance to walk around the room and kind of check their visual. Like, we can check understanding that way. I can see very clearly if your square is split up into even parts, or I can tell you pinch a little bit more, you have to make those all even. So that's one way we'll check for understanding. Then we have a share out of like, what strategies did you use? And so at that time, I mean,
we're going to check their problem solving and their mathematical
Yeah.
thinking around finding parts of parts. So at that time, we're hoping that, you know, some of the kids are identifying, we're actually multiplying two fractions together in order to find a part of a part. And so we're hoping some of those connections start to emerge. And then we're going to be a little bit more explicit, right?
Yeah.
Or
Then
are we doing that after the brownies?
I think after that discussion, we talked about this plan yesterday, but after the discussion, we're being a little bit more explicit about what we're actually doing when we find a part of a part. So there's that explicit kind of like I do, the teacher in direct instruction, and then we have a chance for them to go into their own notebooks, and then we'll like transition them to the book problem, which is very similar, about the brownies and the bake sale, and we'll have them do just the first part of that, and that their work on that, even if they work in partners or in small groups, needs to be written in each of their notebooks. And their notebooks, we'll probably collect them soon because we haven't in a while, and that'll be our check for understanding for that. And then the homework is connected to that, so the homework problem will be another check for understanding after that.
Their summative assessment, though, for the Let's Be Rational unit will be, or we may have a summative quiz for half of the book, which is kind of what we've been doing, is doing a quiz halfway through. But that will be their summative content standard grade for will be their performance on that quiz. We're trying to really, our push in standards-based grading is to really only be recording assessments and only recording grades on authentic assessments. So like assessments where they have had ample time to practice, ample time to ask questions, ample time to make mistakes and learn from them. And then finally, when we give them a summative assessment, that's an actual indicator of what they know about this content standard. And so we're working on doing that more explicitly, whereas other times we would have maybe in the past been like, oh, this is an opportunity to do the content standard grade. And then we'd kind of like build up. So they may have like a striving, which is a 2
out of 4.
Or a starting, which is a 1. So they may have a 1 or a 2 tomorrow because they're just exposed to the unit and they're just starting to like get it. But if we put that in our standards-based grading system according to power law, that would still be affecting their grade. So we're trying really to only assess on content standards the authentic assessments that we know that we've given them ample exposure to the topics. They've had time for all of that. So that's one of our kind of goals moving forward. So.
We'll have them remind us of what the expectations were in the past when we used modeling dough, and kind of basically it is that like the second you're playing with it, you're getting it taken away because it's a tool for learning, as soon as it becomes a distraction, it stops being a learning tool, and we can just take that away. Not as much of a punishment as a natural consequence of it's not helping you focus. We're going to help you focus by removing your distraction. So we'll have them remind us of those expectations, and it's split up in a like there's group work, right, of like trying to figure out this problem that we're posing to them of like how much of what fraction of the zoo is for the wombats. So that'll be kind of group work, and that allows us to go around and check in with tables at a time. And then it's kind of direct instruction where whenever one of us is talking, the other one is always just like little reminders here and there going around. And then when it's independent work time, the volume should be quieter, so it allows us to catch kind of distractions more quick, like right away, and allows us to check in with, maybe we'll pull a small group, or check in with a whole table at a time, or check in with partners. So depending on the size of the groupings and what's happening, we have different management strategies for each of those. I think
and then also I think it's just we always are hoping to be one step ahead of student behavior by just making things as consistent as possible within the learning environment. So like everything from the color of the slide as soon as they walk in, like they know that their do now is in rainbow and they need to finish each of those colors before they move on. And then everything from also having the expectations up on the screen while we're talking so that they know what they're working on right now. Which is helpful for us because we can plan ahead. So
and also we have this is a new thing that we instated this semester, but we have student jobs. So at every table there's 5 different jobs, Yeah,
Yep.
like attendance checker, materials organizer, basic things, but it allows us to kind of put the responsibility for each transition on a different student. So like attendance people, I need to hear from you. Or it's the materials organizer's job to come collect to give the Play-Doh and stuff to their table. And then it's the setups person's job. I don't know what we said. But each that's a way to manage the behavior, because we're not wasting time being like, okay, you come up. They already know their job and they know their expectations. So if they see their job title up as in one of the rainbow colors, like you need to do that.
There's also less downtime. I mean,
Yeah.
the jobs help make the transition smoother, because we don't have to be like, you, and you come collect the modeling dough, or like choose one person from your table. Like, we know this person is doing it. It's quick, it's easy, and we're moving on. And I think overall, the more, not necessarily fast paced, but efficient we are in our class, the better behavior is. And so we're relying on both the day-to-day consistency and then also the engagement in the lesson that we're doing. And then we're also relying on kind of like the expectations that we're setting up within the class and with the students beforehand. I mean, as always, we have some students who have repeated behaviors and will need a couple of extra prompts or a couple of extra reminders. And that's okay. That's what they need, and that's why we're there, and that's why there's 2 teachers. So.
Yeah.
I know.
I mean, the first one that comes up is how can we find parts of parts? Like, and then what, because we're going to talk about Miss Meg we're going to have a situation of like, Miss Meg forgot to include wombats in her zoo. So she's taking 1/4 of her zoo that was designated for hippos, and we're taking 1/3 of that for the wombats. So how much is that? What fraction of the zoo is for the wombats? And so the question would be, what strategies did you use? Kind of what strategies can we use to accurately find parts of parts? And how? I guess those are kind of the same question.
I think also like zooming out one more layer, those are kind of like the questions that we're addressing within the lesson. But I think zooming out one more layer, it's like, why are fractions important, and like, how do we use them? Are those kind of essential questions of the unit? And then overall, we're sticking to our math essential question as well.
We actually changed it since last time. I don't know if we said it in the last video, but we kind of iterated on our essential question to, I don't know if I have it memorized,
I don't have it memorized
but
yet.
it's about, the concept is like, how can we use mathematical concepts to think about the world around us in a mathematical way, is a paraphrase of our essential question. And so that always comes in, right? Floor plans of a zoo, floor plans of your bedroom, maybe your new house.
It's also a connection. The floor plans are also a connection to something that we're going to be diving into later on in our covering and surrounding. So that's like area, perimeter, volume, things like that. So just this is kind of like a way to introduce them to fractions, but it also kind of hints at like, because some of them split their square in 10 inches. They did each side by 10 inches, and they split it into a grid of 100 squares, and then did parts of 100. So like some were very like, we had this great like share out and reflection, and they were kind of like, well, if we knew we had to estimate the fractions beforehand, we wouldn't have made it into a tiny Pokemon exploratorium with like 18 million little Pokemon shelters.
Yeah.
So yeah.
They like the modeling dough. It comes in different colors. We don't really let them choose, but like modeling dough, I mean, and a lot of kids are like, oh, okay, like I'm not asking you to write anything, I'm not asking you to calculate anything, I'm just asking you to literally split this up, show me 1/4, 1/3 of 1/4, like, and it's very step by step. And I think that kind of also takes away a little bit of the fear of like, am I writing the right thing, am I calculating it right, and allows them to just kind of be more engaged and like play with it. And make mistakes. And I think that does boost engagement when it's like, it's okay to make a mistake, just pitch a little bit more of Play-Doh on that side.
It also kind of like gets away from, sometimes like writing down notes can be monotonous.
Yeah.
And it gives them like a time to be hands-on and to kind of play with the dough, even though technically they're modeling.
Yeah.
But it gives them time to be more hands-on. Another thing that we're hoping is the connection to the floor plan. So they've already created their own floor plans, and now kind of now I made my own zoo, and so now they're going to learn my favorite animals. So kind of building that relationship with the students and kind of being like, I love wombats. They are really wacky animals. They are crazy marsupials. So I've got to figure out some more facts about wombats by tomorrow because I don't really love wombats. But you know, kind of like playing with that, like being like, well, what if I wanted to add wombats? It sounds silly, but like honestly, when I'm creating my own house one day, you know, then maybe I'd want to do something a little bit more boring, like remodel my studio so it's a bathroom and a studio. You know, this is a more fun, interactive kind of connection for them to make while also connecting to the real world. So we're hoping that builds engagement, especially since they've worked with floor plans before. So we did just mention the part about like the shopping and the like dividing things up. I think that's like kind of that's the main connection the lesson makes. Is kind of with the fundraising and with splitting up the brownies, But we actually also were starting the lesson with something that's not in the book, and we're starting with something that Kata applied last week, which is like kind of floor plans.
And kind of giving them the chance to. We were very explicit about the fact that the lesson before this in the book talked about like adding and subtracting fractions with like farming land, and like it had all these like generic last names, and it was like Bob's land plus Stewart's land, and so we decided to kind of give them a chance to personalize that problem instead. So they each got a 10 inch by 10 inch piece of paper, had to create a carnival or a park or literally anything they wanted.
Zoo, aquarium, magical animal.
Yeah, as long as it had like 5 sections, and all the sections were split up into straight lines, at least 5 sections. So they could, and they didn't all have to be equal. So they could have like, I don't really like hippos, so they're really confined to this corner, and mine had an elephant water park, like, and so they got creative with that, and then we used that in class that day to kind of estimate sums, and then we used it again to they wrote their own subtraction problems based on their maps, and so we're going to bring that in at the beginning of the lesson. We made up one that we said it's Miss Meg's Zoo, and so that's kind of where the relevance comes in, is like this like continuous spiral of bringing the same thing back, and it's fun for them, and
it definitely boosted engagement when they created their own, and like some connected it to the video games that they play and things like that. So it like spiraling back to that map is like they already have a connection to that. They know it was like a fun activity. They know that we've used it in 2 different ways. One was to estimate what fraction of the whole each part was, and then one was to estimate adding parts, and then the other one was they had to pair up, and then they created their own number sentences, like what is the kangaroos part of the zoo minus the hippos part of the zoo, and they had to actually create subtraction problems and solve them, finding the LCM and then common denominator, and then